Welcome back, everyone, to the special. Very excited for this next segment where we're going to be talking with the Climate Campaign Director for Greenpeace USA, Janet Redman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Very glad to have you on. Obviously, you represent an incredibly important organization historically in this area, and so I'm really interested to find out how the current situation, in the U.S. and internationally, is affecting Greenpeace's efforts.
Yeah, well, of course, Greenpeace has been around for about 50 years, and a lot of our work is really centered on speaking truth to power and bearing witness to what's happening in the environment and happening to people on the front lines of those environmental impacts, as well as really centering direct action, which is a little bit challenging right now while we're staying in our houses and sheltering in place and being alone together. But we've actually been able to really experiment with some new ways of getting people together online to still show collective power. So that's been really exciting and it's forced us to do some innovation. But I think more broadly, what this moment is teaching us is that crises are happening in the environment and are ongoing. And this COVID crisis really shows us that our social system here in the United States is in tatters and is leaving behind hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And the same thing is going to happen when this COVID crisis is over. We still have the ongoing crisis of climate change, the ongoing crisis of biodiversity loss. So I think this teaches us as Greenpeace that we really need to be looking at those systemic shifts that will continue to be plaguing this country and the people at the front lines of crises even after this moment is done. And that's really exciting at the same time because there's really a chance for us to reimagine what comes next.
Yeah, and as many people have pointed out, obviously this is a specific crisis that is intersecting with the environmental crisis. That air pollution, things like that, are having an effect on people's immune system, making them more susceptible. When we get past this crisis, assuming we do at some point, do you think that the experience that people will have gone through here, how does that change potentially their willingness or eagerness to deal with the climate crisis? Do you think that it will sort of gird them to do what's necessary? Are you worried that they might be to some extent worn out? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I certainly hope that this girds people's orientation toward acting and being prepared for the next crisis. I think really what we've seen is that people are coming together in a pretty beautiful way through this crisis. We're all talking about really providing immediate relief to those who need it most, those in the front lines who are protecting us during this public health crisis. I think that's going to teach us, and while we see the next set of crises unfold, whether those are climate crises or biodiversity crises or extreme weather crises in the U.S., it'll really help us understand how to put the people who are at the front lines first. So that feels like an important lesson that I think will last beyond this. I also think what's been pretty interesting is that we are starting to see conversations happen at the policy level that we didn't think were going to happen this year and maybe wouldn't happen next year. So really starting to have a conversation about how do we create the next world that is more prepared for crises and that is more resilient when crises that we know are going to happen. We've been talking about, in some ways, about a Green New Deal. We're also talking about that in terms of investment in the infrastructure that we absolutely need to keep everybody safe, whether it's our healthcare infrastructure, our internet infrastructure so people can work from home where they can and stay connected, or our basic needs infrastructure, like being able to access healthy food and clean water at a time of crisis like this.
So somewhat related to what you're saying there, I know that the organization has put out some sort of guidelines for what they would like to see in terms of the federal response to this, but also some things that they don't want to see. So what are some of those principles?
Yeah, in the very, very bottom line, the very basic principle is that this moment what we can't do in response to this moment is bail out those who put us in this mess, and largely in the first place. I don't mean that corporations are responsible for the COVID crisis, but the fact that we have turned over basically our public health system, our basic public needs in large parts of the private sector. We've invited in corporations to help make laws. We've in fact let the fossil fuel industry help make laws around energy and pollution reduction. That has to stop. That's what's put us in a circumstance where our communities, people who are on the front lines of the public health crisis, are actually less equipped to deal with a crisis than if we were promoting and prioritizing communities first over the interest of corporations.
You mentioned earlier the founding of Greenpeace, and I think it's interesting. It's almost the same age as the holiday that we're celebrating right now. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, both with Greenpeace and with climate activism, environmental activism. Do you think that it's moving in the right direction the last year or so, where we've seen a lot of really high level talk about things like the Green New Deal? Do you see that as an acceleration that perhaps might be difficult for some of these entrenched powers like the fossil fuel industry to stop? Or do you have hope in that way?
Oh yeah, I have a ton of hope. I think when if you had asked me 2 years ago, would we be having a conversation about a massive multi-billion dollar, potentially trillion-dollar investment program to build the things we know we need in a climate safe future, I would have thought you were crazy. But that switched almost overnight. And now we have presidential candidates. We saw the Democratic presidential field fighting to be the biggest climate champion, to talk about ending leasing for oil and gas on public lands. We had Bernie Sanders, one of the presidential candidates, calling out the fossil fuel industry, saying we have to hold fossil fuel companies accountable on the public debate stage, on the national debate stage. That's huge. That's really exciting. I think we've come in like leaps and bounds from where we could have been a year ago, 2 years ago. And I don't see that waning because, frankly, the sad truth is a lot of climate change is baked in. We are going to see the impacts of climate change probably this year, probably next year. And so while we're learning about how to flatten the curve on the COVID crisis, part of what we need to be learning and part of the knowledge and part of the experience we have to take is how we flatten the curve on the climate crisis. And I think people are prepared to do that.
I certainly hope so. Finally, on maybe a more personal note, how are you on Earth Day? How are you staying climate conscious, environmentally conscious during this quarantine? Are you finding it easier, harder?
I mean, it's in some ways it's really easy. I've been visiting with my friends over Zoom meetings, as many people
Hmm.
have, so I'm saving the greenhouse gases from flying or driving to see people, which has been super exciting. I'll be joining a couple of online rallies and some speaking events that's happening with the Earth Day Live event that the Youth Climate Strikes are putting on. And I'll be in the evening putting my face mask on and going to my community garden where I've been able to invest more time in growing some of my own food, which is really exciting and shrinking my footprint in our local food system.
That's awesome, and hopefully people watching can take inspiration from some of that. Janet Redman, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to be with you.